Ferrari is licking its wounds. Considering how the Silverstone weekend unfolded, the final fifth place of a solid Carlos Sainz was the best result the Maranello team could aim for, a position also favored by George Russell's technical retirement. The Imola version of the SF-24 single-seater did what it could, and Carlos Sainz managed the various stages of a difficult race well, building his final result through the transitions between slick, intermediates, slick. It was not realistically possible to aim for anything more in the British Grand Prix last Sunday, as the overall pace shown by Mercedes, Red Bull, and McLaren was in line with expectations, making it impossible for Carlos Sainz and Charles Leclerc to keep up with their rivals. However, the situation of the Monegasque driver deserves a separate analysis. It's evident that it is not a good moment at all for Charles, with some misadventures also influenced by circumstances, but in the last 4 races, there have been several errors. Last weekend, at the 5.891-kilometer Silverstone circuit, the Ferrari driver made an excellent start, gaining 3 positions, but his comeback was first halted behind Lance Stroll. Charles Leclerc managed to overtake the Aston Martin of Lance Stroll on lap 13, at which point Carlos Sainz was ahead with a 5-second gap. In the next 5 laps, the Monegasque lost ground to his Maranello teammate, and when the first drops of rain started falling, he asked the team to switch to intermediate tires. The pit wall gave the okay, but the call from the driver proved wrong. Charles Leclerc's chances of finishing the British Grand Prix in 6th place ended at that moment. The track was not damp enough at that point, though, and Charles Leclerc ended up heading a lap down on the race leaders despite their own struggles hunting grip on slicks. His intermediates would end up being shredded at the moment the crossover period transpired, and the time lost in the earlier laps resigned him to coming 14th. The scenario is complex. Either Charles Leclerc misread the conditions, while Carlos Sainz and Lewis Hamilton at the same moment confirmed the track was still for slicks, or it was a call born out of the frustration of accepting that the best result was 6th place. Ferrari team principal Frederic Vasseur commented that it was now clear that the choice wasn't the right one, possibly due to being 10 seconds behind his teammate. He believed Charles Leclerc saw in that call a chance to fight for the podium again, but stated he wasn't angry about it. In the lap, Charles Leclerc stopped for intermediate tires. The Mercedes W15 cars of Lewis Hamilton, George Russell, and another car went wide at different turns, suggesting it could have been a good decision. The French manager noted that when in the leading group, risks are not taken, and choices are based on the decisions of direct rivals, but it is different when one is behind. Ferrari leaves Silverstone with the worst overall result and performance after the double retirement in the Montreal Grand Prix. The second position in the Constructors' Championship is still in the team's hands, also thanks to McLaren's strategic errors, which has nevertheless climbed to just 7 points behind the Italian side. Frederic Vasseur's reading of the weekend was that it required a necessary sacrifice to understand what wasn't working with the aerodynamic package introduced by the Ferrari technicians at the Circuit de Catalunya in Barcelona. He emphasized that there were no tests available, and that the team couldn't run to understand and solve problems except during race weekends. The Frenchman also noted that it was very difficult as a team to sacrifice Friday's free practice sessions because they knew they would have to recover, and in this context, the rain that fell in Saturday morning's FP3 session at the Silverstone circuit clearly didn't help them. Ferrari's latest updates in Barcelona, prompting an unintended bouncing recurrence at high speed, led the Italian side to split car specs in the earlier practice sessions. The data gathered between the two packages resulted in both drivers running the earlier spec SF-24 to make the car more compliant through the Silverstone sweeps. However, Carlos Sainz was adamant prior to the race that reverting to the iteration that inspired Ferrari to 2 victories earlier in the season wouldn't deliver a marked upturn. But while that transpired to be the case when stable conditions were present, Fred Vasseur is convinced Ferrari made progress towards understanding its recent struggles. Fred Vasseur has likened the situation Ferrari is experiencing to one it endured at Zandvoort last term, when similar tests helped to inspire a turnaround in the latter races. The Maranello-based squad sacrificed that particular weekend to obtain more data on the car's behavior, and that provided the base to secure the sole non-Red Bull. Frederic Vasseur believes Ferrari's choice to replicate that at the Northamptonshire venue was the correct call and will help the side in recovering lost ground in the long term. He recalled that they had faced a similar situation last year, around the same stage of the season, during the races at Silverstone, Budapest, Spa, and paused it in Zandvoort to do a complete scan of the situation, which led to a good recovery in the following weeks. The Ferrari boss noted that when facing an issue, it was challenging because there wasn't a proper test to fix or understand it. He added that it was quite difficult for the team to sometimes compromise or sacrifice a Friday session, knowing it would result in losing some time during the weekend. The Frenchman also stressed that Ferrari is not fixated on the championship picture, despite McLaren narrowing the gap to second place to 7 points. When asked whether Ferrari could still entertain thoughts about catching Red Bull in the 2024 Formula One Championship, Frederic Vasseur responded that he was not focused on the standings. He mentioned that he knew Ferrari was in second place only because a colleague had asked him the same question 10 minutes earlier. He admitted he did not know how many points they were behind Red Bull or ahead of McLaren, and emphasized that the main focus was to find performance and return to the competitive form seen in Monaco or Imola, aiming to fight for pole position and wins. Fred Vasseur noted that with 12 or 13 races remaining, there was still plenty of time to change the situation multiple times. Charles Leclerc has managed only 12 points in the 4 rounds since his victory on home soil in Monaco, and following the events in the British Grand Prix, he has conceded that the latest setback has taken a toll. The Monegasque driver expressed that it was very frustrating, noting that it was another weekend to forget and that the number of such weekends was becoming significant. He described the situation as very hard and difficult to explain, likening the past 4 races to being worse than a nightmare, and expressed hope for a comeback soon. Unable to derive positives from his charge during the opening laps, Charles Leclerc hopes that Ferrari can at least extract something from the data gathered. He found it really difficult to see positives on days like this and wanted to go back with the team to analyze the decision-making process on his side and understand why they were on the wrong side that day. He acknowledged the tricky situation Ferrari is in at the moment. The upgrades brought the expected numbers, but also resulted in significant bouncing at high speeds. For a track like this, they decided it was probably better to have less performance but more consistency, which he thought was the right choice. Going forward, they would analyze all the data with the 2 packages to understand if there was anything they hadn't yet grasped. He noted that the bouncing had improved, leading to better consistency. The week off before heading to Budapest for the next round of the 2024 Formula One Championship, the Hungarian Grand Prix, will be very useful for the Italian side in order to assess the situation back in Maranello. The Silverstone weekend should have clarified what the problems were regarding the Barcelona aerodynamic package and what aspects need correcting. Meanwhile, time is running fast, and rivals are closing in. The announced overtaking by McLaren is now imminent, but on the horizon, the Mercedes threat is also beginning to materialize.